right, I'm going to start with a question. What if I told you that growth wasn't inevitable? Seriously, I'm talking about adapting, evolving, changing, dare I say, improving. What if that wasn't really a guarantee? Think about it in the context of your life and the people that you know. For example, colleagues in a corporate environment that are lost in the bureaucracy of corporate, friends or friendships that seem to be stuck in time, parents that maybe are too particular or obsessed about the role that they play versus the relationship they have with you and how it evolves over time, or even leaders that are meant to inspire you but somehow have you thinking, really? This is what I'm supposed to aspire to? I've always been in pursuit of something, okay? It's kind of just the way that I work. I'm always chasing and I'm always in this constant state of pursuit. In pursuit of what, you may ask? To be frank, I'm not sure I always knew, which is interesting because usually you would expect people to know. There's an assumption that if you're constantly chasing something or if you're constantly in pursuit of something, you know where you're going, you know where the destination is. But in my case, my pursuit was very much a mechanism of adaptation. And when I say adaptation, I mean it in the context of if there were uncertainties happening around me, it would help me cope with a lot of those uncertainties. I moved a lot. I went to 7 different schools. I lived in 3 different countries. And the only place I think I stayed the longest in my life was 4 years consistently in one place for college. So you would think that this would kind of set the stage for, having this profound insight on the way that I look at experiences and enlightenment, but not necessarily. I am an Arab by birth. I am bilingual by upbringing. I'm a designer by degree. I'm an entrepreneur by trade. And I'm a social advocate by experience. And usually, a lot of people would assume that this would mean that, oh my God, she must always know what she's talking about. She comes to the table with this profound wisdom, when I don't necessarily think that's the case. Experience doesn't necessarily lead to enlightenment any more than knowledge leads to wisdom. And I think it's very important to understand the difference. So when I talk about this idea of growth being a choice, it's a conscious act that you make with yourself. And I actually phrase it as growth is something that I would spell out as choice, CHOICE. So when I look at my career trajectory, it was quite fast, okay? I was growing incredibly fast, and my trajectory, many would call, was exponential. And what I mean by exponential, I was successful. And when you're successful, what ends up happening is you get a lot of recognition and a lot of revere, which is wonderful. It's absolutely beautiful. It's a privilege to get. But what tends to happen when you get that, especially from others, is it puts up or presents to the world a facade of fulfillment. Now, fulfillment and facade are 2 kind of juxtaposed words. The problem with facades, and especially when they exist, is that the act of trying to sustain a facade becomes more important than the facade actually being true, which presents a huge problem in the way you start to live your life. And much like the way I'm on this stage, I may have earned my place on this stage, and I'm very proud to be on this stage, but what tends to happen once you're on this stage is you start to realize that there are boundaries to this stage that you can't go past. And that's a very, very difficult reality to live with. That's a very scary thing that you don't want to let go of. And what tends to happen when you start to realize that you have these boundaries, you start to realize that these boundaries are not just boundaries, they're almost like a cage that protects you from the rest of the world, but also confines you. And what's even scarier is that this cage is something that you imposed on yourself. It's a cage that I created. And there's nothing worse than realizing that you're the person, you're the author, you're the person who developed and created this cage that you are in. And what it did was it made me face a very important reality, was that challenging the relationship that I have to growth was a great way for me to kind of kickstart my journey towards really understanding what growth was. And what I mean by that is that it forced me to start to question the choices I was making in my life in an attempt to really understand what the lessons were behind it, which leads me to my first principle about growth. And it's around this idea that growth is a very intentional act. And if you understand that, that's actually the first step on your way to growth. I always thought that when it came to recognition and respect, especially when it came to work, I would be respected for my merit and what I brought to the table. What I found out very, very quickly in my experience was that whether it was my identity, my nationality, the way that I looked, the way that I sounded, my accent, whatever it may be, there would always be a reason for someone to tell me that I did not belong. And there's nothing more painful than hearing that. There's nothing harder than trying to understand and comprehend that. And when I realized that, as much as this was an isolating feeling towards me, this feeling of belonging was a problem for everyone. So much to the point where I would argue that this idea of belonging was a complete illusion. It doesn't exist, completely doesn't exist. And once I came to terms with that, what it did was it started to get me to question how important is this idea of belonging to my entire experience and to my growth to begin with. Getting comfortable with being yourself in spaces where you are made to feel like you don't belong is a choice. And believing that is growth. And that was a big turning point for me. Maya Angelou has a great quote where she says that sometimes you almost have to confront defeat. You have to confront defeat purely to see who it is that you're going to come out of that defeat as, how you are going to be able to come out of it. Who is that person you're going to become as a result of it? And I thought that was so incredible. There's an incredible story that I go back to every single year. It's a novella called The Little Prince. It's actually an adult book, it's not a children's book. However, I would argue that not many adults get it. It is one of those complex books, but what I love about it is it tells the story of the complexities of life. And what it does is it juxtaposes them to different experiences we have. So for example, the struggle with isolation against the need for human connection and love. Our trivial pursuits for superficial things amidst this need to generate some sort of achievement in this life. And it's all told through the eyes of this little boy, this little prince. And what I love about this story is what it does is it consistently reminds me that I need to be thinking about how this relates back to the way that I'm living my life. The choices that I've made came as a result of asking myself difficult questions around where I was headed, what I wanted, and who I was becoming. Me taking on this type of personality and thinking this way and really evaluating the choices I was making led me to make really, really bold decisions that no one understood, to be honest. Not my family, not my friends, not even my colleagues. I switched careers multiple times. I decided to sell my business. I moved multiple countries. And a lot of people didn't get why, and very much like what I'm doing now, I decided that I wanted to start over again, willingly. But it was these bold decisions that were the result of me really looking inward and trying to understand what it is that I'm trying to get out of these incredible experiences that I've had the privilege of living in the life that I have today. Trusting your own abilities to show up in the world and your experience of it. And I think that appreciating that or acknowledging that is growth. Today, when I look back at the choices that I've made, I'm incredibly proud of what it is that have brought me here. I've been in the communication industry for the past 16 years. I know it doesn't show. But when I think about what we do in the creative industry, what we do in marketing, we spend a lot of time trying to understand how human beings act in an attempt to try and influence their behaviors. That's the whole idea behind marketing. And what's interesting is that the goal is always to get people to draw meaning from what it is that we are trying to create. And really the way that we're able to draw meaning is when you get someone to put a label on something. And I thought this was an incredibly profound insight that comes from an industry that feels very superficial. And the reason I find it profound is if we look at it as simply as the concept that it is, that we are responsible for the meaning that is put to any of these different things. We are responsible for that label. What that really tells us is that it is you that makes meaning in whatever experience that you have. It is you that creates the culture that we all aspire to be part of. It is you that builds the community. You get to dictate what that is more than the society that you're trying to be a part of. And I found that to be an incredibly empowering thought. So I invite you today to ask yourself a question. Why are you here today? Aside from the fact that you may know some of the speakers or you may like the brand, what is really the reason behind you attending an event like this today? Because for me, I was trying to figure out what could I bring to this conversation around growth? And as I said, it goes back to vulnerability, right? Because what I realized is that growth is meeting the version of yourself you have yet to come to terms with. And acknowledging that, for me, is growth. So what I'd like to do, and what I'd like to leave you with, is that I invite you to get out of your own way and ask yourself, what does growth mean to you? Because I believe that it is not in the destination, that it's very much rooted in the choice.